The morning sun slanted gently across the curtains of Emma Rivera's small apartment, painting the wooden floor in soft golden stripes. She cradled her mug of chamomile tea between her hands, the steam curling upward in faint ribbons that carried the scent of dried flowers. It was her ritual, as ordinary and steady as the ticking of the clock above the stove. Emma had built her life out of these small rituals, simple anchors that steadied her against the restlessness she sometimes felt but rarely admitted. By 8 o'clock she was walking the familiar gravel path toward Springdale Elementary, her leather satchel bumping gently against her hip. The school was modest, a brick building softened by ivy and laughter, and the children always brightened the moment she stepped inside. By noon, chalk dust clung to the cuffs of her cardigan, evidence of equations written and rewritten across the board. She never minded. In fact, she liked carrying the faint white smudges home with her. They reminded her that she mattered in her quiet way, shaping lives one careful lesson at a time. Her colleagues often teased her for being old-fashioned. She still wrote thank you notes by hand, still pressed flowers in the margins of books, still baked cookies on Friday evenings to share at Sunday service. They thought her content, perhaps even dull, but Emma carried a secret longing she rarely gave words to. Each time a child wrapped tiny arms around her waist at dismissal, each time she saw a mother's hand guiding a little one across the crosswalk, a fierce ache bloomed in her chest. She wanted that, her own child's laughter echoing in a home that wasn't quite so quiet. But she had never found love, never opened herself to fleeting romances or reckless adventures. At 29, she was still a virgin, not out of fear, but because she had been waiting for something true, something steady, something worth her whole heart. That evening, the porch swing outside her childhood home creaked as she settled into it, wrapped in a shawl against the cool air. The swing had been her sanctuary for years. She remembered studying here for exams, writing lesson plans with a cat curled at her feet, whispering prayers into the dusk when life felt too heavy. The wind carried the scent of pine and distant wood smoke, comforting in its familiarity. She sipped her tea slowly, the steam clouding her glasses, when her phone buzzed against her lap. At first, she thought it would be a message from one of her colleagues or perhaps a reminder from the school board. But when she glanced at the screen, her breath hitched. Liam Harper. The name glowed there as if it had been waiting all along. Liam, her childhood best friend, the boy who had once sat on a cracked bench behind the school eating peanut butter sandwiches with her, the boy whose life had spun away into a whirlwind of power and success. Now, he was a man everyone in the world knew by name, a billionaire tech mogul with a face that appeared on magazine covers. Yet, to Emma, he was still the boy who had called her at midnight when grief threatened to drown him. They hadn't spoken in months. Her thumb hesitated before unlocking the screen. The message was short, stripped of his usual humor. Dinner tonight, it's important. Emma's heart skipped once, then again. She read the words 3 times, searching for clues between the letters. Important. What could be so urgent that he reached out of the glittering orbit he lived in to touch the quiet circle of her life? She pressed the phone against her chest and closed her eyes, the porch swing swaying gently beneath her. The evening sky stretched wider, the amber light dimming into shadows. The chamomile had gone cold in her cup, but she didn't notice. Something was shifting. Something she couldn't yet name. For years, her life had been a careful arrangement of chalkboards and teacups, porch swings and whispered prayers. But with that one message, a single thread had been pulled loose. She felt it unravel quietly inside her, tugging at every part of her that had longed for something more. Emma sat there in the fading light, her pulse unsteady, the phone still glowing in her hand. She whispered his name once into the night, not as a question, but as a memory, a promise, and perhaps the beginning of something she had never dared to imagine. Emma stepped out of the cab and tilted her head back, staring at the glass and stone tower that reached into the clouds. Manhattan pulsed around her with horns, footsteps, and flashing lights. But for a moment she stood still, her hands trembling as she clutched her bag. This was Liam's world now, cold marble and velvet shadows, a place where people like her were only visitors. The doorman opened the door with a polished smile, and the elevator carried her upward in silence. every floor number glowing like a countdown. When the doors slid open, Liam was already waiting. Barefoot, sleeves pushed to his elbows, he didn't look like the powerful man who commanded headlines. He looked like the boy she had known, though there was something sharper in his eyes, something weighted. The scent of cedar and faint smoke clung to him as he led her inside. The apartment opened into a cathedral of glass, city lights sprawling like stars at their feet. Dinner was ready on the long table. Pasta, wine, candlelight. He had thought of everything, yet neither of them seemed to taste a bite. Conversation slipped over safe ground, catching up on her students, his newest software deal, memories of Springdale. But beneath every word, Emma felt the current building, like the sky before a storm. His gaze lingered too long, his laugh caught too short. She tried to ignore the way her pulse jumped each time his hand brushed the stem of his glass, the veins in his forearm shifting like lines of a map leading somewhere she had never dared to go. When the plates were cleared, silence finally claimed the room. Liam leaned forward, elbows braced on the table, his voice rougher than she remembered. "I need to ask you something, and I know it's going to sound insane." Emma's fork froze against porcelain. He was breathing differently now, shoulders taut, eyes locked on hers as if the answer could ruin him. "I want a child," he said, his words heavy, deliberate. "My own, but with someone I trust, someone kind, someone who has never wanted me for what I own." Emma blinked, the candlelight shaking in her vision. She waited for the joke, the reveal, but none came. He rose suddenly, restless, pacing the length of the room. "I can handle everything, every cost, every appointment, every detail, but it has to be real. It has to be with someone who sees me." He turned sharply, his gaze striking her like a hand. "You." Her lips parted, but no sound came. The air felt thin, her chest too tight. She whispered before she could stop herself. "I'm still a virgin." The words hung between them like shattered glass. Liam froze. For a moment his face softened in a way she had never seen in boardrooms or magazines. "I know," he said quietly. "I've always known. That's why I'm asking you. Because you value things that matter. Because you still believe in something pure." Emma gripped the edge of her chair, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. It was unthinkable, impossible. Yet when she looked at him, when she remembered the boy broken by grief on a hospital bench, the man who still only called her when he needed something true, she felt the floor tilt beneath her. Outside, the city blazed, restless and loud, but inside the room was nothing but silence and the weight of a request that could change everything they were. The clock ticked once, sharp and final, as if marking the moment her quiet life began to unravel. Emma walked the familiar streets of Springdale with her scarf pulled tight against the autumn wind, but the town felt different now, as if the air itself carried a question she could not answer. Every step home from the schoolhouse replayed the words Liam had spoken across the candlelit table. "I want a child with you." She had taught math and spelling all day, yet her mind kept circling back to him like a bird trapped inside a small room. The laughter of children faded too quickly, and the quiet of her porch swing no longer soothed her. That night she opened an old wooden box she kept under her bed, filled with letters tied in faded ribbons, postcards from Stanford with hurried handwriting, and a photo of Liam at 17, his smile empty after the plane crash that stole his parents. She traced his face with her fingertip and whispered, "Why me? Why now?" The past rushed back with a sharp clarity, the boy who would sneak through her window after midnight to escape the silence of his house, the teenager who confessed in a trembling voice that he sometimes wanted to disappear. She had been his anchor, but anchors were never meant to be asked for children. She couldn't sleep, so she walked barefoot across the creaking floorboards and out to the porch swing. The moon was pale above the maples, and the sound of crickets filled the night. She pressed her palm to her chest and admitted the truth she had never spoken aloud. She wanted to be a mother. It had lived inside her, quietly hidden in the way she lingered over baby shoes in store windows or smiled at mothers cradling toddlers at church. The longing was real, but could it be born this way, not through romance, not through vows, but through a whispered request in a penthouse? Her thoughts tangled tighter until she drove across town and knocked on a door painted sky blue. Mrs. Evelyn, her third-grade teacher, now silver-haired and wise, opened wit. Just soft smile. Emma poured the story out, trembling from the weight of it. Mrs. Evelyn listened in silence, her eyes reflecting the firelight before speaking. Love has many doors, child. Sometimes you enter through friendship, sometimes through grief, sometimes through the strangest of asks. If you walk through in fear, it will crush you. If you walk through with honesty, it may become something sacred. The words lingered like smoke as Emma drove home. She parked and sat in the dark car, her hands gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles whitened. Suspense pulsed through her veins because she knew she stood at a threshold. If she said no, she would lose nothing but gain nothing. If she said yes, everything could break or everything could bloom. When her phone buzzed on the passenger seat, her pulse raced. A new message from Liam. "I didn't mean to scare you. Just think about it. I'll wait." The glow of the screen lit her face as tears slipped down her cheeks. In that moment, Emma knew the ground of her life had shifted forever. Emma sat in her classroom after the last bell, the chalkboard still streaked with faint white lines from the day's lessons. The chairs were stacked neatly, the hallways empty, but her mind was anything but orderly. Liam's request lingered like a storm cloud, heavy and impossible to ignore. She traced circles on the desk with her fingertip, staring at the phone beside her notebook. The glow of his message still haunted her. "I'll wait. Just think about it." She had been thinking about nothing else. That evening she drove to the city again, her hands trembling on the wheel the whole way. The penthouse loomed like something out of a dream when she arrived. Liam greeted her with a cautious smile, his eyes searching her face as though he could read the decision before she spoke. They sat together in silence until Emma finally whispered, "I'll do it, but we do it as equals, no games, no hidden motives." Liam's breath released like he had been holding it for years. Together, he said always. They agreed to begin with doctors, with science, with clear boundaries that would keep their friendship intact. Liam promised to handle everything, and true to his word, he scheduled appointments, drove her to the clinic, and waited with her in sterile white rooms. Emma tried to steady her heartbeat as nurses explained the procedures, her hand clutching the velvet pouch she kept in her bag, a small gift from her grandmother that had become her silent talisman. She told herself it was only about creating life, not about crossing lines that could not be uncrossed. But the first attempt left her shaken. The cold instruments, the bright lights, the mechanical instructions made her feel more like an object than a woman. When she returned to the waiting room, Liam was on his feet instantly. "How was it?" he asked. "Fine," she lied. He didn't believe her. That night in his penthouse, as rain began tapping the wicked wire, and dows she broke. "I feel empty," she whispered, tears burning in her eyes. "What if it never works? What if we never get there?" Liam sat beside her, his voice low and unshakable. "Then we try again. And again. I'm not leaving." Emma looked at him, her chest tightening. "Why me?" she asked. "Why not someone else, anyone else?" He hesitated, his eyes dark as the storm beyond the glass. "Because no one else has ever felt like home." The air between them shifted in that moment, charged and fragile. Emma felt it, the pull she had spent years denying. He stood and walked to the window, his shoulders tense. "When I was 12, I used to dream about running away," he confessed, "packing a bag and disappearing. But every time I pictured it, I thought of the one person who would notice I was gone. You." Her breath caught as thunder rolled in the distance. She rose from the couch and moved to stand beside him, her bare shoulder brushing his arm. Neither spoke, but the silence itself was electric. Outside, the city blurred in silver rain, but inside something unspoken was breaking open. The boundaries they had drawn so carefully trembled like glass about to shatter, and Emma knew the story they had begun with logic and restraint was already slipping into something far more dangerous and far more powerful. The storm hammered against the glass walls of Liam's penthouse as if the sky itself wanted to force its way inside. The city lights blurred behind the rain, turning everything into streaks of gold and silver. Emma stood barefoot in the oversized shirt he had given her, her damp hair falling in loose waves down her back. She had intended to sleep in the guest room, but the thunder was too loud and her thoughts too restless. Liam found her curled on the couch, her knees pulled to her chest, staring at the lightning. He carried a tray into the room, tea with honey and warm cinnamon toast, the kind of comfort food she had loved since childhood. He set it down gently and sat across from her, his eyes soft in the flickering light. Emma tried to smile, tried to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, a tear slipped free. "I don't know what's wrong with me," she whispered. "I thought I could handle this, but I feel broken." Liam leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his voice steady. "You are not broken. You are the strongest person I know. You carried me through nights I didn't think I'd survive. If it doesn't work the first time, then we try again. I'm not leaving you." His conviction was so raw, so absolute, that Emma's chest tightened. Her voice trembled. "Why me? Liam, why not someone easier, someone who wouldn't complicate your life?" He looked away for a long moment before turning back to her, his eyes dark and unguarded. "Because no one else has ever felt like home." The room stilled. The storm outside grew louder, but between them there was only silence charged with something she had never allowed herself to feel. Emma's pulse thudded in her ears. She wanted to step back, to rebuild the walls that had kept them safe for so many years, but her body betrayed her. She leaned closer, drawn as if by gravity. Liam stood abruptly and walked to the window, pressing his palm against the cold glass. "When I was 12, he said quietly, "I used to dream about running away. I'd pack a bag and imagine disappearing. But every time, I thought of one person who would notice. You." His voice cracked on the last word. Emma rose slowly, her bare feet silent on the hardwood, and crossed the room. She stopped beside him, shoulder to shoulder, both of them watching the storm pound the city. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin, the rise and fall of his breath. He turned, just enough to face her, and for the first time in years, she saw not the powerful billionaire the world admired, but the boy she had fed peanut butter sandwiches to, the boy who had cried in her arms after the funeral. His hand lifted, hesitated, then brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, his voice breaking. Emma's lips parted, but no sound came. She didn't step away. She didn't tell him to stop. Instead, she tilted her face ever so slightly toward his. And in that fragile shift, the line between friendship and something far more dangerous shattered. Liam kissed her, slow at first, searching. But the years of silence and suppressed feeling erupted in a wave of heat and desperation. Emma trembled against him, not from fear, but from release, from the unbearable truth that she had always wanted this without ever daring to admit it. He lifted her carefully, as though she were something sacred, carrying her through the dim hallway while the storm raged outside. Their shadows stretched across the walls, tangled and unsteady. In his bedroom, he laid her down with reverence, his hands trembling as they traced her skin. It was not hurried or careless. It was years of devotion breaking open, a sacred surrender neither of them could turn away from. And in the quiet moments between thunder and lightning, Emma realized that nothing about this was as a mistake. The plan, the agreement, the boundaries they had set had already dissolved. What remained was something neither of them had prepared for, but both of them had been waiting for all along. Emma woke before dawn, the city still cloaked in a hushed gray, the storm finally spent. She lay tangled in the sheets, her cheek pressed against Liam's chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. For a moment she thought she was still dreaming, because nothing about this felt real. The man beside her was not the billionaire who appeared in glossy magazines, but the boy who had once sat with her on a cracked bench behind the schoolyard eating a sandwich in silence. She moved carefully, not wanting to wake him, but his arm tightened around her as if he knew she was trying to slip away. "Stay," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. She stayed. 3 weeks passed in a blur of half-whispered phone calls, and nights she replayed over and over in her head. She told no one, not even her closest colleague. In Springdale, she still played the part of the steady teacher, the one who tied shoelaces and read stories aloud. But every time her hand brushed across her stomach, she felt a new kind of fear and hope woven together. When her period did not come, she locked herself in her bathroom and placed a small test on the counter, her palms damp with sweat. She waited one endless minute before flipping it over. 2 pink lines. Her breath shattered. She sank to the tiled floor, clutching her knees as tears blurred her vision. She wasn't afraid of the baby itself, no. She had longed for this all her life. She was afraid of what Liam would think. They had agreed to science, to control and boundaries. Instead, life had arrived through something wild and tender and utterly unplanned. That evening, she wrapped the test in a velvet pouch her grandmother had once given her and drove to the city, her heart hammering like a runaway train. When Liam opened the door to his penthouse and saw her standing there, his face lit with surprise and then concern. "Emma, what is it?" She pressed the pouch into his hands, unable to speak. He opened it slowly, his eyes scanning the object inside before freezing. He looked up, his voice unsteady. "Is this what I think it is?" Emma nodded, unable to hold back the tears. "It just happened," she whispered. "I didn't plan to tell you like this. I was scared. I didn't know how you would feel." Liam crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms so tightly she thought she might break. His voice cracked against her hair. "This isn't just a miracle, Emma. This is ours." When he pulled back, his hands cupped her face and his eyes shone with something raw and fierce. "I need to tell you something, too." Her breath caught. "What?" He swallowed hard, as though he had been carrying the words for years. "I'm in love with you. I think I always have been, but I didn't see it until that night. Until you let me hold you. Until I realized this wasn't about a child at all. This was about us." Emma shook her head softly, overwhelmed. "I didn't want to admit it," she whispered. "I thought maybe I was imagining it. But Liam, I love you too. I think I always have." His forehead touched hers, their tears mingling in silence. The city burned bright below them, but inside that moment there was only the thundering of 2 hearts and the fragile miracle already beginning inside her. The agreement they had once drawn so carefully had dissolved into something bigger than either of them had dared to imagine. Something that would demand everything of them. And yet, as Liam kissed her softly and whispered, "You are the dream," Emma felt the fear slip away. Because what had begun as an arrangement was now a story written by fate itself, and the first chapter of a love that could no longer be hidden. The news spread through Springdale faster than falling leaves caught in the wind. One day Emma was the quiet teacher walking children to the bus line. The next she was whispered about in the grocery store aisles and stared at during Sunday service. A black SUV had been seen dropping her off, Liam Harper's SUV, and the shape of her secret was beginning to show beneath her sweaters. At first, she ignored the glances, telling herself it was only curiosity. But soon the curiosity sharpened into judgment. At the school board meeting, a mother raised her voice loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Is it appropriate for a teacher in her situation to be around children?" The silence that followed was more brutal than the words. Emma felt the ground tilt beneath her. The following morning, the principal slid an envelope across the desk. A temporary leave until things settle down. The letter shook in her hands as if it weighed more than stone. Every lesson, every moment she had poured into her classroom seemed erased by rumor and assumption. That evening she sat on her porch steps, her knees drawn tight to her chest, staring at the fading sky. The town she had always loved now felt like a cage. She did not even hear Liam's car until he was beside her. He crouched low, his eyes scanning her face. "What happened?" She handed him the letter without a word. His jaw tightened, his chest rising with fury as he read. "I'll fix this." "No," she said quickly, gripping his arm. "Please don't. If you fight them, it will only prove their whispers right. They will say I trapped you, that I am using your power." Liam sat down beside her, his hand covering hers. "You don't have to stand alone. You have me." Emma shook her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. "They don't see us, Liam. They see a story they want to tell. A billionaire and a teacher. A scandal." He turned to her fully, his voice low and rambling. "Do you think that's what this is?" She whispered no, but her heart ached with the weight of how little truth mattered to those who wanted something to gossip about. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the evening air sharp with the smell of wood smoke. Finally, Liam spoke again. Then we stop hiding. We love out loud. Let them stare. Let them judge. I'll hold your hand in every room. I'll show them who you are. Who we are. Emma looked at him, the certainty in his eyes stronger than the doubt clawing at her chest. She nodded, not because the fear was gone, but because love was louder. The next Sunday they walked into her church together. Whispers erupted instantly, a wave of voices carried across the pews, but Liam never let go of her hand. When the pastor asked if anyone had a testimony, Liam stood. He didn't give a speech. He simply said, "I've learned the most important things in life aren't built in boardrooms. They're built in silence, in patience, in the people who stay. That's what love looks like. And I found it." Emma's eyes blurred with tears as the church fell quiet, every whisper silenced not by power, but by truth. And for the first time since the news had spread, she felt the weight on her shoulders begin to lift. But in the stillness of that sacred moment, she also felt something else rising, a new suspense curling at the edges of her heart. If their love was to be lived out loud, then the whole world would soon see it, and she wondered how far the world would go to try to tear it down. Winter lights spilled over Manhattan like a blade of glass the morning Liam drove Emma to a quiet neighborhood far from the city noise. The streets were lined with bare trees and elegant homes trimmed with frost. Emma sat in silence, her hand resting on the curve of her belly, while Liam's grip tightened around the steering wheel, as though he carried a secret too heavy to hold. When the car stopped in front of a cream-colored house with blue shutters, Emma blinked in confusion. Liam turned to her, his voice unsteady. "It's ours." Emma stepped out slowly, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. The house rose before her with a wide porch and windows glowing faintly from within. She walked up the steps, her heart pounding. Liam followed close behind, unlocking the door and gesturing her inside. The rooms were empty, but full of echoes, her footsteps bouncing against hardwood floors, her fingertips brushing walls that smelled faintly of fresh paint. She turned to him, her voice trembling. "You bought a house." He nodded nervously. "I wanted us to have a place of our own, somewhere safe, somewhere for him." Her heart caught at the word him. He smiled through a rush of relief. The blood test came back. "It's a boy." Emma pressed her hands to her stomach, tears stinging her eyes. She whispered the name that had lived inside her for years, Ethan Rivera Harper. Liam closed his eyes and repeated it like a vow. Ethan Rivera Harper. But the joy was fragile, laced with suspense. Emma could see it in the shadows under Liam's eyes, in the way he scanned the windows as if someone might be watching. The world was beginning to take notice of them beyond Springdale. Photographers had already caught them hand in hand in the park headlines, calling her the small-town teacher who stole the billionaire's heart. Investors whispered about his distractions, board members questioned his priorities. Every moment, if peace seemed edged by the threat of intrusion. That night, as they stood on the rooftop of his penthouse, the city spread wide and merciless around them. Liam dropped to one knee, a velvet box in his hand. Emma gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. He looked up at her, his eyes burning. "I know we began this with an agreement with rules and walls, but what we have now, this is love. I don't want to wait another day to call you mine. I'm not asking you because of the baby. I'm asking because of you." Tears blurred her vision as he opened the box, the diamond catching the city lights like a star trapped in velvet. "Yes," she whispered again and again. He slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a desperation that tasted of both victory and fear. For in that moment, Emma knew their love was no longer theirs alone. It was a story the world would hunger for, a story the world might try to twist. And though her heart swelled with joy, suspense coiled in her chest because she could feel it. Something darker was coming, something that would test whether even love out loud could survive the weight of the world watching. The night the contractions began, the world outside their window was quiet, snow falling in soft spirals over Greenwood Estates. Emma woke with a sharp ache low in her back, her breath catching in the dark. At first, she thought it was another restless dream, but when the second wave came stronger and deeper, she clutched the edge of the bed and whispered, "Liam." He was on his feet in an instant, already reaching for the go-bag by the door. His voice was calm, but his eyes gave him away. "It's time." The hospital lights were harsh, the halls buzzing with urgency. Emma hated the machines, the endless beeping, the strangers' voices telling her to breathe when she could barely find her own. Hours stretched into eternity, each contraction tearing through her body until her fingers dug so deep into Liam's hand that his knuckles turned white. She whispered through clenched teeth, "I can't do this." Liam bent close, his forehead pressed to hers, his voice steady even as his own tears slipped free. "You can. You've done harder things. You loved me when I was unlovable. You walked through fire without blinking. You can do this." 17 hours later, the sterile air split open with a cry high and fierce. Emma sobbed as they placed the tiny, wrinkled bundle on her chest, his skin warm, his lungs announcing him to the world. She whispered his name against his downy head, "Ethan." Liam stood frozen, a hand pressed over his mouth before he finally moved forward, his shoulders shaking. When Emma looked up, his face was wet, his expression undone. "Do you want to hold him?" she asked through her tears. He nodded, unable to speak. When the baby settled into his arms, Liam broke. He sank into the corner of the room, his head bent over the child, his body trembling as he whispered, "You're here. You're really here." Emma watched them, her heart aching so full she thought it might shatter. The billionaire who once built empires now cradled the smallest life imaginable as though nothing else in the world existed. But even in that moment of sacred joy, the suspense lingered. Outside the hospital walls, reporters already waited cameras ready to capture the first glimpse of the child who tied a small-town teacher to one of the most powerful men in the world. Headlines brewed like storm clouds, investors whispered about distractions and enemies Liam had long ignored, now circled with interest. Emma knew their family had just begun, but so had a battle she did not yet understand. As dawn painted the sky in pale rose and gold, Liam sat beside her, the baby asleep in his arms. He looked at her with a quiet intensity. "I didn't know it was possible to love this much all at once." Emma smiled through her exhaustion. "Now you understand." He kissed her forehead. "Understand what?" "That family isn't something you plan. It's something you live one heartbeat at a time." The words settled between them, but the silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy with both promise and warning. Because even as Ethan stirred softly in his sleep, Emma felt it. The world was waiting just outside their door, and soon it would come for them. 6 months after Ethan's birth, the house on Greenwood Estates no longer echoed with emptiness. It breathed with the rhythm of a family. Morning sunlight spilled across the nursery walls, painted soft blue, while Ethan's laughter filled every corner. Emma rocked him in the glider, humming softly, while Liam crouched on the floor beside them, building towers out of wooden blocks, only for their son to knock them down with a triumphant squeal. The billionaire who once spoke only in the language of business now spoke in lullabies and silly voices, his phone forgotten on the counter. For Emma, life had changed in ways she could not have imagined. She still taught part-time from home, but her most important classroom had become the nursery. She read stories aloud to Ethan while he babbled in her lap. She whispered lessons about kindness and courage while folding his tiny clothes. Every longing she had once hidden in her heart had been answered in the quiet miracles of motherhood. Yet peace was fragile because the world beyond their walls had not forgotten them. Paparazzi hovered at the edge of their street, their cameras flashing each time Liam carried Ethan into the car. Tabloids printed stories about the small-town teacher who had captured the billionaire's heart, some cruel, some adoring. One headline screamed trap, another whispered fairy tale. Emma tried to shield herself, but some nights she sat awake, wondering how long love could withstand a world that wanted to dissect it. Liam saw her fear and answered it the only way he knew, with action. One evening, he called her onto the porch, the sky burning with streaks of orange and violet. He placed a worn leather box in her hands, his expression unreadable. "I want you to see something," he said quietly. Inside were photographs, letters, scraps of their past, taped together by years. A note she had written him at 13 promising he would never be alone, a postcard from his first semester at Stanford, her handwriting scrawled across the back, a pressed flower from the swing in her backyard. He had kept everything. Emma's breath caught as tears blurred her vision. "You saved all this." Liam's voice broke. "Even when I was building companies, even when the world thought I had everything, this was the only proof I was really living." Emma touched his cheek, her voice trembling. "All this time you loved me." He nodded. "I think I always did. I just didn't know it until I almost lost you." The final shock was not the box of memories, but the way the truth rewrote their entire story. Their agreement had never been about convenience. It had been destiny waiting for courage. Emma pressed her forehead to his, whispering the words that had lived in her since the beginning. "I would have always chosen you." That night they walked back inside, hand in hand, to where Ethan slept curled against a stuffed bear. The house was quiet, but not empty. It pulsed with the sound of belonging. Liam bent over the crib, his hand resting gently on his son's chest. Emma slipped her arm around him, and together they watched the tiny heartbeat that had turned their world upside down. Outside, the world still buzzed with gossip, still questioned, still tried to turn their love into a headline. But inside their home there was no noise, only truth. They were no longer a contract, no longer a secret, no longer afraid. They were a family chosen not by circumstance, but by love, louder than judgment, stronger than fear. Emma leaned her head on Liam's shoulder, whispering so softly it was almost a prayer. "Everything meant for me was already waiting. I just had to be brave enough to say yes." Liam kissed the top of her head, his arm tightening around her as Ethan stirred and sighed in his sleep. And in that quiet, sacred moment, the story was complete, not because it ended, but because it had truly begun.